It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. So, just how much will your mortgage be going up? The Bank of England is preparing to reveal what could well be the largest interest rate rise in 30 years. We'll be analysing how much the hike could be and what that will mean for your finances. On today's show, I'll be speaking to a former member of the Bank of England committee, which makes those decisions, plus a mortgage expert. We'll also be speaking to the Climate Minister, Graham Stewart, not least about the Prime Minister's U-turn to go to COP27. Also ahead, the Labour Party chair, Annalise Dodds. It is Thursday, the 3rd of November. More mortgage misery. The Bank of England is expected to reveal its biggest interest rate rise in 3 decades. Situation critical. Council leaders attack the Home Office over migrant processing procedures, saying Kent is at breaking point.
That as legal action is launched against the Home Office due to overcrowding here at Manston, with reports that some migrants have been abandoned in London.
Evacuation alerts in Japan. North Korea launching a series of missile tests. Let down. We speak to the families who lost loved ones in the Manchester Arena bombing, with the latest inquiry findings due out today.
That little girl was let down 100% by the emergency services. They should be ashamed of themselves that they allowed that to happen.
We will not stand for this shambles. Northern mayors call for an overhaul of rail operators as questions loom over HS2. I'll be speaking to the Mayor of West Yorkshire. Also ahead this morning, men's mental health. I'll ask the former England football and rugby stars Jermaine Jenas and Ugo Monye while they're urging men to show their vulnerable side.
They tried to make me go to rehab. I said no, no, no.
And memorabilia from the legends of rock and roll goes up for auction, including Amy Winehouse's iconic beehive. Morning all. Could there be yet more bad news for mortgage holders today? The Bank of England is expected to raise interest rates again. This would be the 8th time in a row as it attempts to get inflation under control. And it could be about to reveal its biggest rise in 3 decades. Our business correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, joins us in the studio. Gurpreet, good to see you this morning. Look, there will be people who are incredibly concerned about this because undoubtedly it will lead to rises in your mortgage repayments. However, inflation is still a real concern.
Yeah, we're really expecting the Bank of England today to raise interest rates by 75 basis points to 3%. Now, these numbers might not mean like much to you, might not mean anything, but this would be the biggest interest rate rise that we've seen since 1992, and it would take rates to a level that we haven't seen since the global financial crisis more than a decade ago. If the bank moves today, it would be following in the footsteps of the European Central Bank, and we expect the US Central Bank, the US Federal Reserve, to also move next week. Inflation is really a global problem, and it's been rising considerably since we emerged from those lockdowns, and the war in Ukraine has exacerbated it. In the UK, prices are rising more than 5 times faster than the bank's 2% target. I think very few people, it will have escaped very few people. Everything from food to transport to fuel is rising pretty quickly. So the bank is really keen to get a grip of that, even if it might mean some painful times ahead. Well,
let's just we can actually take a look at the graph itself, and it is pretty concerning. But there we have back there those historically low interest rates. Basically, money was free for governments almost at that point, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 now rises. Much of which will lead plenty of people to say, look, maybe the Bank of England needed to move a bit more quickly on this.
Yeah, I mean, the bank has come under criticism that they should have got a grip of inflation earlier. Some would say that at the time, you might remember when we first emerged from lockdown, a lot of policymakers were saying inflation's transitory. It might peak at 3 or 4%. And now we're looking at peaks of 13%. But there have been some geopolitical events that were outside policymakers' control, like the war in Ukraine. But I think the really painful thing will be for, like you said, mortgage holders and for ordinary people, because the counterweight of rising interest rates, while it dampens inflation, it also dampens growth. And we could do with a bit of economic growth in the UK. The bank today is going to unveil a fresh set of forecasts, which will show that we're probably heading for a recession towards the end of the year. And interest rates are only going to turn the screw.
Lots more from you throughout the morning, I'm sure, Gurpreet. For now, thanks very much indeed. We will, of course, have full coverage of the Bank of England's announcement, and that will be from 12 o'clock here on Sky News. Now, a new poll for Sky News has found that people overwhelmingly blame the government for rising interest rates amidst increasing pressure on family budgets. 32% of people say that mortgage or rent payments have increased over the last 3 months. But those paying mortgages rather than renting, well, they say that they have felt the most pain. 36% say their mortgage costs have increased. And they think they know who's to blame for that. People believe that the Conservative Party's economic policies in government and the decisions made by the former Prime Minister Liz Truss are the two most important factors, slightly ahead of the state of the global economy. Now, Ms Truss may be gone, but people do have doubts about her replacement. Rishi Sunak, well, let's take a quick look. Rishi Sunak, 42% of people trusting the Labour leader Keir Starmer to reduce the cost of living, compared to 34% trusting Mr Sunak to do the same. Now, our other main story this morning. Local council leaders have warned that the situation at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre is at breaking point, and have raised fears over growing tensions and the risk of disorder. All this as the government faces a legal challenge over the conditions at the centre in Kent, following reports of severe overcrowding. We've also heard reports of some migrants being abandoned at stations in London. Well, let's head to Manston. Sky's Emma Birchley is there for us this morning. And Emma, just explain exactly how much we know about this legal challenge and indeed what these local authority leaders are so concerned about.
Yes, so the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, was speaking to Sophie Ridge on Sky News last night and revealed that the government is facing this judicial review, which will basically look at the lawfulness of what's been happening here. You have to remember it's a processing centre where people are meant to come for 24 hours. In some cases, they've been staying a month. It's meant to be for 1,600 people, and we've heard reports that it's been closer to 4,000 people being dealt with here. Now, Mr Jenrick said he's been working night and day to deal with this, and that people have been moved out to longer-term accommodation, and he says that hopefully within a few days the site should be legally compliant, which does make you wonder whether what's happening here at the moment is lawful. And at the same time, we've heard about this letter that's been sent by the council leaders across Kent and Medway, 14 of them in all, which really doesn't hold back, full of frustration at what they call the disproportionate pressure that's being put on the county. I'll give you an idea of this letter. So they say Kent is at breaking point. Our public services, including health, social care and schools, are already under extreme pressure from surging local demand and the cost of living crisis. The situation at Manston is critical. We now have approaching 4,000 service users contained within segregated marquees as we approach the coldest months of the year. Some have been on roll mats for over a month. And the letter goes on. We have hundreds of mostly Albanian service users not claiming asylum and being bailed and dropped at mid-Kent train stations with no follow-up where they go or if they leave Kent. And at the same time, we've also heard about a girl in this centre breaking through the security guards, running to the perimeter fence, throwing a message in a bottle over to a press photographer. And in that letter, she says about how people are getting sick. She talks about pregnant women not being looked after properly, and that 50 families have been there over a month. So clearly this very much towards the top of the agenda at the moment, and there is a lot still to be sorted out.
Emma, thanks very much indeed. Plenty coming up on the show this morning. Shortly, I'll be speaking to the Climate Minister, Graham Stewart. He's representing the government this morning. Certainly plenty to discuss with him. just after 8. The chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, will be joining us. And amidst questions over the future of the HS2 rail project, I'll be speaking to the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Braden. South Korea and Japan say North Korea has staged yet another significant weapons test, including possibly firing an intercontinental ballistic missile. Japan's government initially sounded these sirens as a warning that a missile had overflown its territory, but later said that was incorrect. They did, however, confirm that a missile had been fired. Sky's Asia correspondent Helen Smith has the latest from Beijing.
The South Koreans and the Japanese said that they believed an intercontinental ballistic missile was fired. That's essentially a missile that has the capacity to hit targets on the other side of the world. It's believed that it failed partway through its flight and fell into the sea. But as you saw there, the concern was high enough that sirens were sounded in Japan. A number of northern districts, people told to take shelter and stay inside. And as you said, it comes a day after a huge swathe of missiles were fired by the North Koreans, believed to be the most fired in any one day yesterday. And one of them actually landed closer to the South Korean coast than any have previously. So a real stepping up. It actually prompted the South Koreans to fire some missiles in retaliation. And it comes in the context of a number of months of this sort of escalating incremental build-up of tension. The North Koreans have fired more missiles this year than they have in any year since the leader Kim Jong-un came to power. And there's a real sense of nervousness in the region. Worth saying, the North Koreans, for their part, they are saying they're responding to current military drills that are underway between, sort of in combination with the South Koreans and the Americans. The North Koreans see that as incredibly provocative. They see that as a threat to them, despite the Americans claiming that the drills are defensive in nature. But the real fear is what all these escalating actions lead to. The nervousness is that the North Koreans are preparing to undertake another full nuclear test. The last one undertaken wasn't since 2017, and that would be a huge ramping up, because it's difficult to see how the South Koreans and the Americans wouldn't have to respond in some form to that type of provocation. So nervous times on the Korean Peninsula for sure.
Helen Smith there. Now, findings from the latest stage of the Manchester Arena bombing inquiry will be released later today. But what is already clear is that some lives may not have been lost had emergency services been at the scene more quickly. One man who cared for the youngest victim told us that it felt like an eternity before help arrived. Sky's Inzaman Rashid reports.
This girl's life was cut brutally short on a day which was also undoubtedly her happiest. Safi Roussos, just 8 years old in May 2017, was murdered as she was leaving the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, the attack's youngest victim.
She just had this aura about herself where she could get anything she wanted just by smiling. She was just a magnet to people.
They are happy memories that will remain untouched, but so will the thought of knowing his daughter suffered unimaginable pain.
That little girl was let down 100% by the emergency services. They should be ashamed of themselves that they allowed that to happen. They should not allow a child to be taken out on a cardboard poster that's full of blood from somebody else.
And it's what the second report from a public inquiry will address, focusing on the response of the emergency services on the night of the Manchester Arena attack. Over months of evidence the inquiry heard, there were failings across the board. Police chiefs forced to apologise, the fire service embarrassed by their response, and paramedics criticised for the delay in treating victims. Experts revealed there were missed opportunities to save lives, including Safi's. It was at 10:31 p.m. Salman Abedi detonated his bomb in the foyer of the Manchester Arena. At 10:57, a piece of advertising board was used as a makeshift stretcher to carry Safi out of the arena by 2 police officers and a member of the public. She was carried 102 metres to an exit on Trinity Way, but there were no ambulances in sight. She waited 17 minutes before an ambulance was flagged down by a police officer to take her to hospital. At 11:40, Safi was pronounced dead after losing too much blood from her legs. In her final moments, it was Paul Reed, a poster seller who stayed by Safi, doing all he possibly could to comfort her as they waited for professional help.
About like years. I was thinking in a minute now, everybody's going to come in and they're going to get me out and kick me out of there, but it just didn't work like that. I do blame the top brass for, not dealing with the situation properly.
The emergency services say it is inappropriate to comment before the report is published when 5 years on, families of victims like Safi may feel they're closer to the truth, but they will want nothing less than real changes. Inzamam Rashid, Sky News, Manchester.
And we'll be bringing you more on this story at around about 9:20. I'll be speaking to Niall, a lawyer representing some of the families of the victims of the attack. Some other headlines now, and Ethiopia's warring sides have signed a deal to end a conflict that's raged for more than 2 years. Representatives of the government and Tigray rebels signed a disarmament agreement, which also restores services and aid deliveries. Thousands of people have been killed in the fighting, which pushed northern Ethiopia to the brink of famine. New research into the psychedelic chemical in so-called magic mushrooms suggests it may ease depression in some hard-to-treat patients. 233 adults in the US, Canada and Europe were given varying doses of psilocybin, and depression symptoms declined amongst all for up to 3 weeks. Scientists have discovered that monkeypox transmission can happen up to 4 days before any symptoms appear. Researchers at the UK Health Security Agency found more than half of transmission occurs in the pre-symptomatic phase, meaning that many infections cannot be prevented by asking people to isolate if they detect symptoms. The National Trust is creating the UK's largest wildflower grassland. The project will see pockets of a rich savanna sown across 70 miles of the North Devon landscape by 2030 to replace natural habitats lost over the past 100 years. The Liverpool manager, Jurgen Klopp, has said he doesn't feel players should be criticised if they don't speak out against the World Cup host Qatar. It follows calls from human rights groups on footballers to use their status to highlight issues in Qatar this winter.
The decision was made by other people, and if you want to criticize anybody, then criticize the people who made the decision, not the sport, not the competition, and for sure not the players. So, and now it's not fair as well that we expect from them that they go there and make big political statements or whatever. It's just not fair.
Joe Biden has warned that US democracy is under threat from the election result denials of Donald Trump supporters and the violence that he says they've inspired. The president was speaking just days before the midterm elections, where seats in the House of Representatives and the Senate are being contested. From Washington, our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
This was no normal pre-election speech. Scheduled late and with a sense of urgency, it wasn't about policy.
Good evening, everyone.
It was about the stability of the nation.
My fellow Americans, we're facing a defining moment, an inflection point. Make no mistake, democracy is on the ballot for all of us.
His party may well be trailing in the polls. A drubbing next week is possible, and so of course he's looking for votes. But the president sought to get beyond that.
This is not about me. It's about all of us.
It was a warning about what he sees as the fraying fabric of American society.
A struggle for decency and dignity, a struggle for prosperity and progress, a struggle for the very soul of America itself.
Every day since he lost the 2020 election, Donald Trump has cried foul, claiming continually without any evidence that he won.
You know, American democracy is under attack because the defeated former president of the United States refused to accept the results of the 2020 election. Every recount confirmed the results.
Yet polls suggest that up to 70% of Republican voters believe President Trump. Mr. Biden drew a line between what he called the big lie and the hammer attack last week on the House Speaker's husband.
The assailant ended up using a hammer to smash Paul's skull. We don't settle our differences in America with a riot, a mob, or a bullet, or a hammer.
There are up to 300 Republican election deniers on the ballot next week. Trump allies like Arizona's Kari Lake. If they win, they will judge the validity of the next presidential election. An intervention like this is extremely controversial, saying in such stark terms that only his party stands for democracy. Is he essentially telling voters that the nation's democracy has already been lost? And just days away from the elections into such a tense environment, it's high risk indeed. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
The Royal Mail has released its Christmas stamp collection featuring the Queen's silhouette for the final time. The 6 Art Deco-style stamps feature nativity scenes, very stylish as well, with an outline of the late monarch's image in the top right. The distinctive profile facing left and wearing the diamond diadem has appeared on festive stamps since 1967. They look very lovely, they do too. But let's return our focus to interest rates and the rise we're expecting from the Bank of England at midday. Very pleased to say we can speak now to Charles Goodhart, former member of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee. Charles, great to have you on the programme this morning and so early as well. I just wonder what you were expecting to hear from the MPC today. There appears to be a bit of a consensus forming around a rise of 75 basis points.
Yes, but I think there's an alternative. They could go for lower, for 50 basis points. I hope they will go for 75 basis points because they're still a long way behind the curve.
Just in terms of what the Bank of England have been doing recently, this is what the 8th successive time that we are certainly expecting a raise, and where it will fall we will find out at midday. What do you make of the argument that some have been prosecuting that perhaps the Bank of England has been somewhat slow in terms of reacting to where inflation is and responding accordingly regarding interest rates?
I don't think they've been slow in timing. In fact, they were the first central bank to start raising interest rates. But unlike the Fed, which has now been raising interest rates by 75 basis points a time for the last 4 goes, the bank has tended to raise interest rates really rather slowly, 25 basis points and then 50 basis points. And they're actually now rather far behind in terms of the level that they've got to. And it's clear that they've got to go quite a long way further if they're going to bring inflation back to target.
Well, just on that point, I mean, how successful has the Bank of England been in that endeavour so far? I mean, where are we expecting inflation to finally plateau and fall?
Well, the target, of course, is to get inflation back to 2%. But the question is whether the headwinds from a worldwide declining labour force is going to allow them to do that. One of the things that has surprised most of the central banks is how tight labour markets have been since COVID began and are likely to remain very tight. And unfortunately, it's not until the labour market has more slack, higher level of unemployment, we're going to see the level of inflation go down to the kind of levels of about 2% that the central bank is mandated to achieve.
Are there any other options on the table to deal with this rampant inflation other than simply continually adding to the interest rate?
Not really. There are always suggestions about trying to fix prices by law. But we tried that in the 1970s, 1980s, and trying to actually legislate to fix wages and prices really doesn't work at all well. And I'm really quite worried about the suggestion that the government is going to try and deal with inflation in future by holding particularly public sector wages down to, shall we say, 2 or 3% next year, when inflation is still going to be a great deal higher. That's a recipe for having good public sector services and for strikes and for all kinds of difficulties.
It indeed certainly makes life a lot more difficult if you are one of those public sector servants. I hope this isn't a kind of a how long's a piece of string question, but I wonder where you anticipate interest rates peaking.
The honest answer to that is that nobody knows, because we've never been in quite this situation before. My guess, and it's a guess, and it's no better than anybody else's, maybe worse, is that it'll be somewhere perhaps just a little bit north of 5%.
Wow. But of course, we have seen something of a transition of power, not the only transition of power we've seen over the past couple of years, but we have seen a recent transition of power in Downing Street. Rishi Sunak into number 10, Jeremy Hunt into number 11. It does feel that that alone, and of course the rhetoric that both have been deploying, have served to stabilise the markets just a bit.
Oh, absolutely. And I think interest rates will now peak at a considerably lower level than they would have had to if we'd still had the unfunded massive expansion giveaway of Kwarteng's mini budget.
Well, and again, just on that point, there is an awful lot of pushback from anyone that you speak to in government these days when you suggest that, for example, the rate at which governments can borrow, the amount of money we're all paying on our mortgages, that any of this had anything to do with Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, with anything to do with the policies of the government. I mean, it is demonstrably true, isn't it, that whilst there are certainly global factors that are affecting pretty much every Western industrialised economy at the moment, there were factors that were exacerbated by political decisions taken by Liz Truss and her Chancellor.
Yes, absolutely. And you can see by looking at the timing of the changes in interest rates, the movements in the markets, that there was a clear, strong and very adverse reaction to the mini budget. Yes, there are many global factors pushing interest rates up around the world, as you pointed out, but that makes it all the more important that we don't have local factors making that even considerably worse.
Charles, with me bearing in mind your earlier comment that as regards interest rates, no one really knows, your view that we could get as high as 5%, how long would you anticipate it taking to get to that kind of point?
It depends how quickly the Bank of England pushes up interest rates. My concern is that if they don't start pushing interest rates up faster than they have been in the past, we will start getting unemployment rising. And the political pushback from that will actually prevent them from raising interest rates to a level which actually will have an effect in bringing inflation back down to target. I think it's quite likely that over future years, we'll see a combination of somewhat slower growth over the next few years and inflation and interest rates considerably higher than they have been in the past and remaining above target.
Charles, it's been great to talk to you this morning. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Now, Europe's temperatures have risen by more than twice the global average over the past 30 years. The World Meteorological Organization says they've gone up about 0.5 degrees Celsius per decade since 1991. After record-breaking drought and wildfires this year, the UN describes Europe as a live picture of a warming planet. And with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's just take a quick look at the impact of climate change on the planet. The right half of the screen there showing how our energy is being created in real time. Still a significant reliance, of course, on natural gas there, 40.5% of our energy coming via that at the moment. On the top left, you can see just how much warmer the Earth is since 1880. That's when modern record-keeping began. And then finally, that alarming number down at the bottom left there. That's the total carbon dioxide emissions in millions of tonnes. Now, have you ever encountered one of these whilst swimming in the sea? Jellyfish? Yeah, not my favourite. You could well be finding lots more of them very, very soon indeed. The Marine Conservation Society says that more jellyfish have been spotted along UK coastlines over the past year. Scientists are pointing to warmer sea temperatures. Now, the problem is that they include these small but menacing creatures, the Portuguese man-o'-war. Now, their long blue tentacles can cause painful welts on the skin and a rash that, for some people, can last for weeks. Now, if you scan the QR code on the screen right now, you can listen to today's edition of the Sky News Daily Podcast. On this episode, Sally Lockwood is exploring just how much of a threat bird flu is to consumers, business and wildlife, with a turkey farmer, bird expert and our science and technology editor, Tom Clark. Time for us to see how the weather's looking.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to be unsettled again today and a bit cooler, but Friday looking mostly fine. There'll be a fine start for many, although still very windy in the far north and west. But there will be showers near northern and northern and western coast, I should say, and more general rain across the southeast. East Anglia, southeast England, well, they'll remain largely overcast with further rain through the morning. Elsewhere, most places can expect some good sunny spells, but showers will develop widely in the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Welcome back. Joining me now in the studio, very pleased to say, Graham Stewart, of course, Climate Minister. Minister, great to have you in the programme. As I mentioned to you whilst we were in the break, there's an awful lot we can talk about, certainly on your brief, but I do still want to return to where we've started every interview this week, and that's the situation at Manston. Can we just confirm what Robert Jenrick seemed to imply last night, that right now Manston is operating illegally? People are being detained there for longer than the 24 hours that you're entitled to do under the law.
We've seen, I think it's a 77% increase in the number of people in the crossings and asylum seekers. We've seen this unacceptable surge in small boats, which is why the Prime Minister was talking to the French President last week, why we've working with the Albanian authorities. The system is struggling to cope, and that's exactly why we brought in the Nationality and Borders Bill in order to have a one-stop processing. That's why we've got the Rwanda policy. That's why but it is not where we want it to be quite right now, and we are simply looking to balance that up. Thousands more hotel rooms have been sorted out. But it's unacceptable to the British people, sure. And we need to do more to tackle the traffickers in what is an unprecedented surge in illegal migration.
No one is doubting that this government is ramping up its response and is now trying to deal with the situation at Manston. But this is what Robert Jenrick told my colleague Sophie Ridge last night. I expect Manston will be returned to a well-functioning and legally compliant site very rapidly. Are you personally happy that the government in which you serve is currently detaining asylum seekers, for that is what they are at Manston, that is detaining them illegally? Are you personally comfortable with that?
Well, obviously not. None of us are comfortable with it. We want it tackled. We want to get a grip. That's exactly what the Home Secretary's focused on. I think she's got her priorities right, and that's making sure that we do continue to treat people in a compassionate way. But fundamentally behind this, of course, are all these illegal gangs, and British people look on it with disbelief.
Including council leaders down in Kent. They've written this letter to the Home Office last night. There are a couple of bits in it that leap out. Put simply, this says, Kent is at breaking point. Secondary schools in Canterbury and Ashford currently have no Year 7 and Year 9 places for local children due to the unexpected and therefore unplanned for arrivals of refugee children. They also mention that there are around about 20,000 on waiting list for council housing there. We're now talking about local children not being able to get access to their school. On a human level, why has the government let this situation develop? I understand that there has been a ramping up of numbers, but it has been a pretty consistent ramping up of numbers. It's not been some overnight exponential rise.
Well, there has been an incredible surge, but one of the reasons for bringing in dispersal, which is one of the policies to make sure that every local authority right around this country shares in taking on this burden. It is immense. And we recognise that the people of Kent and the public services in Kent should not be carrying that burden alone. And that's why we're looking to bring in all these measures. You know, that is our focus. That's the Home Secretary's focus. We're not claiming it's acceptable right now, and that's why we're taking steps to put it right.
Just one other thing to pop in the screen there, and of course we've mentioned Albanians, and there is certainly a feeling that a significant number of those who have been coming here for criminal reasons. Well, you know, Albania's Prime Minister Edi Rama is not desperately happy about this. He tweeted this last night: "Albania is not a rich country and was for a very long time a victim of empires. We never had our own. We have a duty to fight crime at home and are doing so resolutely, as cooperating closely with others too. Ready to work closer with the UK, but facts are crucial. So is mutual respect." I think we may have the wrong one there. Yeah. But in essence, what the Albanian Prime Minister is suggesting is that perhaps some of the rhetoric that is being directed at his fellow countrymen and women might just be slightly over the top.
Well, I'm grateful for the work we're doing with the Albanians, and they have been sending senior police officers over so as to speed up processing. We've got an expedited system to return Albanians if it turns out that they are not legitimate asylum seekers. So we are trying to work in cooperation, but clearly there's pressure. You can see it from the councils, you can see it from members of parliament, you can hear it from people and journalists around the country. It can lead to language which is sometimes unfortunate, and it is worth putting on record our gratitude to the Albanian government for their cooperation in working to sort this out.
Let's as promised, move on to your brief. How concerned were you by the UN emissions gap report that emerged yesterday?
Well, we're absolutely focused on making sure that the Glasgow Climate Pact is converted into action. And as you say, the world is not on track for 1.5 degrees.
2.8%, 2.8 degrees was what they were suggesting.
Report after report after report. And that is why. I mean, why have we taken the actions we've taken? We've cut our emissions in this country domestically. We're only a small part of the globe, but setting an example by more than any other major economy on earth. We're
also opening up the bidding process for 100 new kind of gas and oil extraction licences in the North Sea. That doesn't sit very comfortably with a commitment to net zero.
It doesn't look like it does. It absolutely does. We're committed to a 50% reduction in emissions around production in the North Sea. We're managing the decline of the basin. It is expected, with new licences, that it'll still be reducing at about 7% a year, faster than the globe needs to cut its oil and gas, and producing our own energy here to ever higher environmental standards. Stopping us spending billions on bringing in oil and gas from other countries. It's a weird argument when you're going to have to burn oil and gas up to 2050 and through 2050, even on net zero, to think that buying it from abroad is somehow superior from doing it at home.
Well, it's going to be sold in the same market. We're not going to get it cheaper just because it's produced.
It's not about being cheaper, but if you
but you're buying it from the international market.
Well, you're buying it if you have domestic production. I mean, the tax on that at the moment is 65%. I mean, it is $7 billion from the windfall levy that was brought in, $10 billion next year. It really is worth nailing, Neil, the idea that us, as part of a declining basin, producing our own oil and gas, when we have net zero in our law, when it doesn't affect our consumption, and when we are net importers, that is somehow bad. It isn't. And I really would like to nail it. I hope your viewers at home would see that us producing our own oil and gas to ever higher standards, leading to technology which is then exported around the rest of the world, is a good thing. I know it sounds ironic. I get mocked in the newspapers.
No.
Climate minister says more oil and gas is good for the environment. In that context, it is, and it's an argument worth making. And I'll tell you what, people in North East Scotland they understand that argument, and to see the Scottish government wanting to abandon them and having this argument made out as if they are part of the problem. They are part of the transition.
Others who live in Aberdeen who point to the fact that Rishi Sunak has said that he doesn't want solar farms on farmland. That doesn't strike me as particularly pushing towards net zero. He's also said that he is going to scrap the plans to relax the ban on onshore wind, which is, by my reckoning, and indeed by other people's reckoning, the cheapest cheapest form of renewable energy. Now, those are two ways in which we could dramatically increase renewable, clean energy production in this country, and he said no to it 5 minutes after entering Downing Street.
Well, we are committed to growing our renewables, which we've done more than anyone else
but not
in
on
Europe.
land.
Well, we are doing it on land, and we're seeing solar. I mean, getting the balance right between farmland and solar is something that we're working on, and when we have further details to share, we'll do so. But actually, the cheapest current form of renewable is on-ground solar, with onshore wind being just behind. And onshore wind is our largest single renewable sector, with 14 gigawatts coming from it.
Can you confirm that which we've been hearing in the papers this morning, that actually the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, have been listening to Keir Starmer and that they are going to expand the scope of the windfall tax on the energy giants?
Well, I can be absolutely clear that I don't think we'd go listening to Keir Starmer, but we do always keep these things under review. But on fiscal matters, I leave that to my Treasury colleagues, and we will hear more on the 17th of November.
Just one final word from you on Matt Hancock, who we're now hearing is getting £400,000 for appearing on I'm a Celebrity. That's nearly 5 times his MP salary. Look, is there perhaps a degree of hypocrisy from the Conservative Whip's office? They've removed the whip from Matt Hancock for going to Australia. They didn't remove it from Boris Johnson for going to the Caribbean on a holiday. He wasn't doing anything about dyslexia. Or indeed from Liz Truss, who I'm reliably informed is also abroad on her hauls.
Well, we think that MPs should be attending to their duties.
Apart from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss.
And, of course, with so many people working from home these days, it is possible to work from wherever you are in the world. It's not really possible to do that when you're in the jungle.
Are you telling me that he wouldn't have had the whip removed if he'd been able to take a laptop in so he could answer his constituents' emails?
I think while you're eating various worms and sticking your head in unpleasant places, it's quite hard, Neil, to concentrate on what's going on in your Suffolk constituency.
I will tell you, it will be a nation-unifying event of that, I am sure. Minister, it's been great to have you in the programme. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
But before we move on, let's take a quick run through the papers, and we start with the Metro. It reports on a man trying to rescue his nephew from the Manston Migrant Centre after spotting him in press coverage. The Eye says that people who'd been held in the centre were dumped by mistake outside London's Victoria Station by the Home Office. Funnily enough, that is also the lead in The Guardian. It says that asylum seekers were abandoned. The Express says the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is lining up 3 more countries after Rwanda to send migrants to for processing. I don't think we've actually sent it to Rwanda yet, have we? Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, is here. When she gets off her phone, we'll be able to tell me whether I was right there. We haven't sent anyone to Rwanda yet. It seems a little bit premature. Shall we talk about that which we were just hearing from the Minister? And on Manston, again, actually, I think we heard it there as clearly as we've heard it from anyone within this government, that the situation there is bad and they are trying, but it is absolutely, by their own admission, not what it should be. Not what it should be, and not going to be sorted out immediately. We heard from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, last night that the numbers there are now down to 3,500, which is well over the ordinary capacity of 1,600, and that is only with these marquees outside. And as the Kent County Council leaders have pointed out in their really stinging letter to the government saying, how do you expect us to find accommodation for all the people there? They say, as their residents are also concerned that as we head into the winter months, that people might have to stay in those kind of conditions. So they've got this double whammy of not having enough accommodation, and the feeling that if they give it to the people at that site, then local people will lose out. There will be crisis with school places, but also local residents are concerned that vulnerable people are being kept in very difficult conditions. And I think one of the questions the government are going to have to answer is not just how they disperse people from the Manston site right now, with accusations that some of them were dropped at Victoria Station last night without anywhere to go, but also how they prevent this overcrowding in future if these boat crossing numbers continue as they have been. They have been at record levels this year, 40,000. Yeah, but the idea that that's come out of nowhere, I'm sorry, as the Minister appeared to suggest, I mean, that's just wrong. We have seen a steady rise. Steady rise, and some of it was predicted, but it's been a lot higher than in previous years. Yeah. And if that continues, what is the answer? And the Home Affairs Select Committee has already asked
the Home Secretary for answers in the next 2 weeks about how they prevent this sort of overcrowding in the future. Rishi Sunak said yesterday that Labour can't attack his plan because they haven't got a plan. But I think Labour are going to continue attacking his plan in the near future because they see this as an issue in which the government is weak and isn't able to account for how it's going to sort out this situation.
I think you might have a point. Tamara, thanks very much indeed. Welcome back. Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, has urged his supporters to lift blockades being staged in more than 70 cities in the country. The protests have brought traffic to a standstill and are hitting the economy. They began on Sunday after Bolsonaro's narrow loss to leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in the presidential election. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has the latest from the streets of Sao Paulo.
The president's office may have conceded defeat, but many of Jair Bolsonaro's millions of supporters have not. They took to the streets of Sao Paulo in their thousands. The national flag waved above the crowds as they gathered outside the headquarters of the military's Southeastern Command. They're calling for an intervention. Put simply, they want a military coup. They despise the leftist policies of Lula da Silva and they want him out by any means.
He cannot take the power. The people is on the street. We want the military take over and do no election, you know?
We are defending our, how can I say, liberty, property, family, and our people, our family are above all. No communists, please. We must to fight until we give our liberty.
Haulage lorries began the anti-Lula protests by blocking roads across the country. They've become a symbol of this protest movement against the election result. But President Bolsonaro has asked them to stop.
I know the economy has its importance. Maybe you are giving more importance to other things now, and it is legitimate. But I want to make an appeal to you to clear the highways. This is not part, in my view, of legitimate protest.
Many here thought the fervour of Bolsonaro's supporters would have been dampened. It hasn't been. They've taken to the streets in 70 cities across the country.
Well, these people are hoping that if they can keep up these sort of rallies, if they can close roads and perhaps affect the economy, then the military will intervene. But so far, they've said very, very little. In fact, it appears that they want to maintain a completely neutral stance.
Keeping the momentum going when even Bolsonaro's strongest political allies have publicly said the game is over will be hard for these people to achieve. It was a close election, but they did lose. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Sao Paulo.
Now, some of you will be overjoyed by this fun-sized piece of news. Others will be devastated. Bounty chocolates no longer meet the bar and will thus be scrapped from celebrations boxes. Can't believe I'm about to read this out. Don't worry, the mutiny on a bounty may be only temporary, as it is part of a trial ahead of Christmas. The chocolate manufacturer Mars Wrigley says that it found 39% of customers want the coconut-flavoured sweet permanently banished. I have to say I'm going to pop myself into that category. It certainly isn't my favourite. The limited edition Bountyless tubs will include extra Mars, Milky Way and Galaxy chocolates as substitutes. Do get in touch with your thoughts on that at Sky News Neil. Are you mutinying on the bounty today, or do you, like me, think that you shouldn't have coconut anywhere near chocolate? Now, we've been taking a look through some of the photos that have caught our eye today. A holy fashion statement or a holy mistake? Do you see what I'm doing there? Either way, it does seem to be something of a new trend. Queen Letizia of Spain, that's who we're looking at there. Well, she was pictured with a large cutout at a film festival. It looks like she's just left the iron on it, doesn't it? Opinions? Well, I have to say they are divided between fashion brave and ruined skirt. Again, I think I might well be at the bottom. And I'm being told it's 112 quid, apparently. Money well spent.